Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte. This is the podcast where we ask the tricky questions about the world around us. I'm George Parrett, and today you're listening to episode 1, where we ask the question, what will be the last job on Earth? Hi everyone, and thank you for tuning into our very first podcast. I'm George Parrett, and every week I'll be joined by a different co-host to help me tackle these big questions. This week it's Ethan. Hi Ethan, how's it going?
Hi George, yeah, it's good. I'm really excited, a little bit nervous. We're in a proper studio, which I've never been in before, and all mic'd up, so that's exciting. And the question today is really interesting. What will be the last job on Earth?
That's right, and I think there's lots in the media constantly about this automation anxiety. And the fear that robots will take over our jobs and we haven't quite got the right skills to survive in the future. So I'm looking forward to really getting stuck into this question and finding out what can be done, what skills are needed, how we can educate the next generation of workers and find out what will be the last job on Earth.
So we're joined in the green room today by Anne-Marie Malley. Anne-Marie leads our human capital practice in the UK, which means she spends a lot of time helping organisations prepare for the future of the workplace. Hi Anne-Marie.
Hi there.
And we're joined by Matt Howard. Matt is our Director of Artificial Intelligence. He's the man in the know about all things robotics and automation. Hi Matt.
Hello.
Great, and thank you so much, Matt and Anne-Marie, for coming today. I think it's we're thrilled that you're here. And I think just before we dive into the big question, Ethan and I thought we might need to warm up a little bit, and we have an icebreaker question. Ethan, do you want to pick a question for us to sort of tackle?
Yeah, so I'll reach into my bucket right now, see what they have. Neither me or George have seen this either, so let's see. Okay, so it's what did you want to be when you grew up?
That's good. Oh, Anne-Marie,
I can go.
Yeah.
A florist.
A florist?
I wanted to be a florist.
How come?
Because I think I like flowers. I think they're really creative. And I think you have flowers at periods in your life when there's either huge joy or huge sadness, and they just bring happiness.
It seems like quite a creative role, which is immune from automation as well for the coming few decades. So yeah, that sounds good. How about you, Matt?
I wanted to be a pilot.
Excellent.
Which was ended by the rapid onset of myopia when I was about 9 years old. So that one came to a premature end.
Awesome.
But I always dreamed of flying aircraft. One day, I mean, I have had lessons, but obviously I wanted to be a fighter pilot, not a normal pilot.
I was strangely obsessed with dinosaurs growing up, so paleontologist was my destined profession, but it's just a bit mucky for me, really.
Bit of a Ross Geller from Friends.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think I wanted to be an actor. That was until I realised the realities of paying rent, I think, and then I thought it's just too risky for me. But this is kind of me fulfilling that dream a little bit.
Absolutely, today.
In the studio, yeah, exactly.
So let's get into this week's first big question, which is what will be the last job on Earth? And Anne-Marie, if I can come to you first. Deloitte's research shows that I think 35% of jobs in the UK are highly susceptible to automation within the next 10 to 15 years. But are we getting a bit ahead of ourselves? Are robots really going to be stealing our jobs in the future?
I think it probably is the case, but I don't know that it's a huge amount to worry about. So if you think about all of the, especially technical developments over the last 30 or 40 years, and more jobs have been created through that than lost, right? So there have been a huge number of jobs that have been replaced, but there are more jobs in the economy. So there has been a net positive impact on the economy because of that. I do think we should think about the skills, though, that we're teaching our children, right? So schools, universities, because our research also shows that I think 65% of the children that are in school right now will work in jobs that we can't even imagine, right? So we have to worry and we have to think about whether what we're teaching them right now is actually going to be relevant. Do we even know if it'll be relevant? But I'm not convinced the 3 Rs, being a mum of 2, are particularly relevant to what we do in the workplace today and what we will do in the future.
I mean, how do you agree with that, Matt? I mean, what are the sort of timescales we're looking at here in terms of disruption to the workforce? And just going on Anne-Marie's point, how can you kind of think about what sort of jobs might exist in the future if we don't really know?
So, yes, I mean, I agree with those points. I think we're already seeing disruption, but disruption sometimes gets always always badged as a bad thing, roles are changing. So if we look at people in call centres, there was a sort of idea that call centres would just be automated out of existence. What we're seeing is people in call centres are doing new jobs. So the people who traditionally just answered the phones or did the web chat also now look after a chatbot. And they help the chatbot to answer customer calls really, really well. Because the best people to work out how to make a chatbot work well are the people who answer calls. And so you're seeing already this sort of augmented workforce taking shape. Now they're different skills, and they are different skills. And it isn't quite the same set of skills that you use to be a good call centre operative and train a chatbot. But actually the chatbots are getting better now where you don't need to be deep technical, you need to be good at training a chatbot. So we're seeing people's roles evolve and change around how things are changing in the marketplace. I think also there is a tendency with these statistics to think in terms of cliff edges and sort of this, tomorrow there will be 35% less jobs. No, there won't. There will be 35% different jobs to what we have today. But the key issue is skills. And I think that's a very, very legitimate concern.
Yeah. I also think that challenge that you talk about, Matt, in terms of how do organisations start to think about managing a workforce that is potentially robotics, artificial intelligence, partially, and people. And I don't think many organisations have really thought through the challenges of that. I'd even think in 3 years, 5 years out, what is the makeup of the workforce? How many of it is human, if you will, versus some kind of technology, artificial intelligence, robot, and how do they co-work? So that's a great example you gave, where you have people whose part of their role becomes that they manage and evolve and develop a bot, and how much of that happens and how quickly, and what change does that make to the organisation?
And I think the other piece of this is we have a tendency to think about the world only in the way we see it. So we take today's jobs and we propagate them forward 5 years. That is not how the world will be in 5 years. It'll be radically different. And if you look back 5 years ago, our expectations, for example, of digital, of availability of service, have transformed. So it isn't that, take the chatbot example, the chatbot's there to make sure you can always get what you want when you need it. But it doesn't do as much as a normal person would. You still need people there to do the complex stuff. But the easy stuff at 3 o'clock in the morning when you just want to report your credit cards lost because you've, God forbid, been in a taxi and come out of the nightclub. Not that anyone at Deloitte would ever do such a thing, would they? That's when a bot is really powerful. So we always have to remember that the world we think of and rationalise to today is not the world of 5 years from now. And so not only will these things happen, but also our expectations and the whole landscape will be very, very different.
Yeah, so on that point about expectations and assumptions shifting and the new jobs in the future, I read recently that the majority of children will work in jobs that currently don't exist. So as the education sector or as businesses, how do we kind of address those? How do we know what kind of skills to teach, and how do we prepare them for things that we don't know what's coming up?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that's definitely, those jobs are not, well, we can't even imagine what those jobs will be, therefore what we think we should be educating our children. But I think there is definitely a realisation and a move through our research into the skills that will be required, which are much more, not the 3 Rs, but I think what we're calling the 3 Cs, which are more around communication, which includes empathy, emotional intelligence, creativity, and then also cognitive, so the whole problem-solving point, which is where I think we found today that machine learning AI is just not as attuned, can't quite replicate those skills. So I think a move to those kind of skills within our education system is probably good. But you used to be a teacher, Ethan. What's your perspective?
I did used to be a teacher. No, I agree. I think the kind of the broad-based skills, like as you mentioned, creativity, problem-solving, that kind of complement the new technology and what we foresee the new technology to be, is more important than ever kind of teaching for a specific job, especially at a younger age. It's more about building those skills, definitely.
Yeah, and I think there are some other trends that we can be fairly confident about. So clearly data science, coding skills, these are becoming increasingly important, and I think we're finding new ways to teach those. I think the other piece of this as well is, as you say, those skills that machines simply don't have and are likely not to have for a very long time are clearly skills that we need. So back to this point around augmented workforce, high volume, very reproducible, frankly very boring things are good things for machines. Difficult, complex, messy, emotive things or creative things are very good for humans. And that's always been the case. I think it's just, we shouldn't lose sight of that.
But could you see that changing at all? Could you imagine a creative robot or even an emotional robot at some point in the future?
Well, we shouldn't never say never. I think we're further away from some things like that than we sometimes think, and we're not as far away from some other things than we actually are. So, good examples are if you actually listen to so-called creative AI, and if you've seen what's been done with it, it is fairly, in my view, dreadful. On the other hand, people talk about autonomous driving, and I think autonomous driving is a lot closer than people imagine. Maybe not to drive through the centre of London, which is a very difficult challenge, but to effectively drive in a straight line from one side of a country to another one, that is pretty close. Arguably, it's already there. We just haven't enabled the tech yet. So it's about actually being very pragmatic and realistic about what actually is happening and skilling people to that world.
Yeah.
And Matt, it strikes me that it's not so much the actual technology that's concerning workers about their future job prospects, but it's the pace of change and how to contend with that. Is that the real driver for automation anxiety?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting space. An interesting way to think about the pace of change with this is think about the movie Back to the Future. Right. So stay with me on this. If you think about it, so I think the time period there is 55 to 85, right? And you've got the difference between those two periods. Broadly speaking, they're not that different. People have guitars, they have cars, they have skateboards, they do stuff and all the rest of it. Now think about 85 to 2015, and you've got smartphones in your pockets that are the equivalent of the Apollo space program you're walking around with. You have social media, so the president of the US can shout at you at 4 o'clock in the morning. The world has changed in a very, very quick and rapid way, and that pace is accelerating. And that, I think, is one thing to think about quite carefully, that rapid pace and people feeling like it's moving faster than they can keep up with in a broader, quite complex political context as well. That's where I think some of the anxiety can stem from, combined with, of course, Hollywood not always doing us great favours in this particular space.
Waiting for that hoverboard to come out.
Yeah, we're all still waiting for that. But
and I think it's not even a new issue, is it? I think Industrial Revolution, the Luddite movement back then. I think there's always been this sort of fear of the unknown and fear of the future to a certain extent. So yeah.
And justifiably so. I mean, it's not unusual. It's reasonable for people to have those concerns. I think there's a responsibility to discuss them and manage them.
So you mentioned the pace of change, and our recent Deloitte Digital Disruption Index raises the issue of ethics in automation. And do you think how we're tackling these ethically is keeping up with the exponential rate of change in terms of the technology?
So that's a really interesting space. I think there's a broader question here, which is around ethics in technology per se, and not just ethics, but actually how we go about developing technology. And I think representation and diversity in technology is actually part of the challenge here. I think there's a little bit of a tendency at the moment to sort of take AI and automation and sort of build this new ethics framework around it and these new expectations for how you do business and how you address things just for that area. Actually, I think there's a much more, that's almost a symptom. The cause, one could argue, is a lack of diversity in the technology sector, for example. And I think a bigger concern I have is actually how do we address that more fundamental challenge, which is around how do you frankly get away from a world which is very dominated by Western white males who are developing a lot of these tools and technologies and making it a much more inclusive world. So we have a much more diverse workforce building the technologies of the future. And that is where I think, yes, we need appropriate frameworks, but if something's the wrong thing to do in the analog world, it's the wrong thing to do in the digital world. So that your business ethics should not change. It's like, to some extent, wrapping ethics around PowerPoint, right? It's kind of what you do with that. But what I do think is a real concern is that diversity question at the heart of how these digital technologies are being developed.
Okay, so how to prevent machine bias reflecting human bias?
Correct. So the question really, in my mind, is why is there a human bias? How do we fix that? Because all we're doing then is we're sort of fixing the data. We're not actually fixing that fundamental bias, and that's almost a bigger concern in a way.
I think there's another ethical question about the amount of data that's now available and how we use that. And I'm thinking particularly from a human capital perspective. So organisations now have a huge amount of data about their people, and most of us are quite happy for them to have that data. Most of us use wearables, right? And if you were to give that to your organisation, they could help to understand when you're stressed, why you're stressed, and how they might help. Some people are really comfortable with that. Some people are very uncomfortable with that. So I think it's also about making sure people understand what data is available, and if they do choose to allow the organisation to use it, what's going to be done with that. I think people are scared about that because they don't quite understand what data is there and what the organisation might do with it. So I think there's just an education and also a very explicit giving of permission to be able to do that, because I think it's a really interesting area that we could do a lot with, but there's clearly quite a big ethical question around it as well.
And I think that's been absolutely surfaced by GDPR, because
Absolutely.
if you now go to a website and it says to you, are you happy for us to use your data?
Yeah.
And then you tick on the show me how you use my data, and then 6 pages of how they use your data appears. I don't know about you folks, but I was pretty shocked
Scary.
when I saw some of that stuff.
Mm.
Yeah.
And amazed.
Yeah.
So I think that is and again, that links back to that was the wrong thing to do. You know, how it got to this point. So we need to address a fundamental question of actually how do we get people's consent for this, and how do we manage that?
But I suppose, governments and companies are slowly waking up to the fact that, given the pace of change in how we use technology and how technology's influencing our ways of work, I suppose it's better late than never, but they need to sort of speed up to that pace at the same time. So.
I think slowly is a very good word to use in that, right? I think then that's part of the issue, right? So part of the research that we've done is that individually we are embracing and using technology really quickly, right? iPhones you mentioned earlier, smartphones you mentioned earlier.
Other smartphones are available.
Other smartphones are available, and they've got incredible technology within them. Organisations have not kept up to speed with that, and public policy is one of the things that is holding that back. So I think there is a need for a real fast refresh of that policy to make sure that certainly UK organisations can remain competitive globally, because otherwise we get left behind. If as individuals we are embracing and using better and more advanced technologies than we can do in organisations, then there is something adrift.
And I wonder if actually individuals are getting more savvy than organisations in a way, because we are being exposed to it at an individual level. We all got inboxes full of emails just before Christmas, but they all came from organisations of different maturity, some of whom, dare I say, didn't seem completely confident about what they were up to.
Yes.
So suddenly we're all very aware of it, but I'm not sure that's propagated out.
And in our personal lives we work really well and efficiently, and we can customise things, and it's really easy. And then oftentimes you come to work and it's not. And that's just quite an interesting new dynamic, I think.
Yeah, kind of how organisations can tap into that intuition that we have as individuals and raise it up to the organisation level.
I think we have this first generation of people entering the workforce, having been born in this century, sort of coming to it, and I think their perspective of technology and their expectations would be rapidly different from elsewhere. And hope, with any luck, that may help drive that change and speed it up a little bit.
So taking a slightly different turn, I'm from the north, through and through. So one of my
not as far north as me.
Not as far north as you, that's true. So one of the concerns that I had was about the kind of regional effects of automation. So I'm unaware. I was hoping you could shed some light on whether you think it'll help to spread the wealth, or whether it'll kind of ingrain this kind of south of England, London-centric direction we appear to be moving in at the moment as an economy and as a country.
I think it will help to spread the wealth, and I think what I think it will help to do, I think technology will help us to access talent pools wherever they are. Right, so I think the gig economy is a great example of that, crowdsourcing, where we can now use those technologies to access talent and access people in every corner of the world. So not even just the UK, but globally. And people can choose to live wherever they want to live and work. So the whole concept of digital nomads. So for me, the technology aspect and the digitisation of how we work changes the way we work and the physical location of where we work really significantly. So people, I think, can take advantage of that individually as well as organisationally. Now, even if you look at what we've done in the UK, where we've built a really significant digital hub in London, in Clerkenwell, obviously, but we're now doing it in Edinburgh, we're now doing it in Lisbon. So we're pushing that out as well, because the talent is not here. The demand for it is too big, and people who want to do that kind of work don't always want to live here. I think it's a great opportunity.
That gives me hope.
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, we're putting people into Edinburgh to drive the AI rollout and build our capability up there. We've also there are digital hubs around the country. You can see a lot of development houses. They can't afford to be in London, to be honest. It's a really expensive place to spin up a business. And I think also people's lifestyle expectations are changing a bit, I suspect. As you say, the digital nomad thing, but also turns out maybe the only way to live your life isn't in a massively busy, crowded city, sitting on a tube for an hour a day, getting into an office. You know, other lifestyle choices are available. So I think, I absolutely hope and agree that hopefully it will go that way.
As Anne-Marie, just sort of bringing it back to the skills element and what future generations can do to arm themselves and equip themselves with this sort of changing working environment. I mean, what are the key skills which today's children should be learning? I have a 3.5-year-old starting school in September. You know, should she be learning coding from
yes,
kindergarten onwards? Yeah.
Python, yes. So I think it is problem solving. It is about it's about thinking, right? About using creativity in problem solving and just using creativity more generally. And it's about communication. So communication, influencing, empathy, those kind of skills. Personally, I'm a huge fan of the arithmetic part of the 3 R's. I think everybody should be really good at maths. And I think these are good bases.
I was a maths teacher, so
I'm a maths graduate. So
I've got 2 English degrees, so I'm a bit stuff.
Love it. No, but there are some foundations which clearly we should all learn. But we do need to dial up so that our children are much more digitally fluent than we are, and that they are ready to work in a world that is not just working with humans, that they coexist in. So I think it's a dial-up of those. And our education system and our education, the subjects that we teach our kids haven't changed for, I don't know how many years, 40 years, 50 years, longer.
And also teachers themselves, there's teachers who've been teaching for 30 years, and even me, who is quite a young teacher, I wouldn't know how to teach someone how to operate in an AI world. So I think we have to teach the teachers as well.
Yeah.
And Anne-Marie, last November you spoke at Skills London, which is a large skills and education conference for young people in the UK. And we actually asked some 16 and 18-year-olds who attended what they thought about robots in the workforce. So let's have a listen to what they had to say.
Robots are a very contentious topic. Robots seem to be creeping into our everyday lives, and they seem to be able to do a lot of the things that us humans can do as well, and a lot of the time they can do it better.
Some of the jobs that AI could take would be quite beneficial. Jobs that might be repetitive could be replaced, which I think is more beneficial than dangerous.
There are going to be more jobs created because someone out there is going to need to control the robots and decide what they do. There's always going to be someone who needs to design it, who needs to fix it when it goes wrong. I don't really know what kind of job I might have, but that could be because it's not created yet.
In the future, the kind of jobs that will survive will be ones around technology that still have to work with those robots and improve them, but also the ones that work with people, because people are the best people to work with face to face.
I really do think that machines and just technology in general is more a force for good than evil.
I am a bit scared about robots, but I think everyone is. I think as long as we stay careful with what we do with them, I think I'd be positive about it. I think it's a good thing.
Humans are vital for our everyday life, for our survival, and for our happiness and for our development as a species, and so I think that's just irreplaceable.
Well, yeah, I think it's fascinating to hear that so many of those young people have a fairly pragmatic and quite good grasp of what's going on and what might happen to them in the future, even for jobs which don't exist yet. But I think it's that question again, Anne-Marie. How can we prepare the sort of youth of today, teenagers, graduates about to leave school, for that uncertainty in the future?
I think by teaching them that they have to constantly learn, right? It's now about lifelong learning. So the skills they learn today, the jobs that we do today, will be redundant in 2.5 years. So the half-life of skills is now 2.5 years. It used to be 20 years, right? So it's about how do we teach children to continually be curious and learn and understand that their skills will become redundant and they have to reinvent them. And we have to give our people the tools and the resources, the assets to be able to do that and to be able to do that as and when they need it. But I do think we do have to, in the UK, look at how we and what we educate our children with in the first place, because the changes are happening much more quickly than we are responding to them. And I think Ethan made a really good point earlier about the school teachers not even really understanding what the impact of digital and technology might be and what jobs might be out there. And one of the initiatives that we did was in the Power Up Week, which is where we bring together government bodies, policymakers, both in the private and the public sector, together to kind of think about a big problem, and it was about skills. And one of the initiatives that came out of that was us actually developing a digital, called it a digital innovation pack, where we could go and talk to teachers and pupils at schools to say, this is what's happening, this is what's happening with technology, here are the jobs that are being created, here's the evolution, here's the jobs that are going away, and just start that kind of conversation in the education process. And I think that's really helpful, as you say, to the teaching profession, as well as to parents and to, you know, school kids in years 5, you know, senior school.
Okay, so I guess we should probably address the question of the pod, which is, what will be the last job on Earth? Our producer is convinced that the last job on Earth will be a hairdresser, as he's adamant that he would never let a machine cut his hair, despite the fact he would let it perform surgery. When I was talking to my girlfriend, she thought it was more about the apocalypse than about automation, so she said the last job on Earth would be whoever was in charge of getting people on the last rocket to Mars. But what do you guys think will actually be the last job on Earth, if there is one?
I don't know if I have an answer to that. I think there will continue to be lots and lots and lots and lots of jobs, is the way I view this. I think, you know, the AI we have today is very narrow. It goes deep in certain things, but actually humans are really good at lots of stuff, particularly being human, but at doing all the creative things. And just that one point around problem solving that we've come back to time and time again. Our best data scientists are the problem solvers. People who just write code and don't problem solve. So maybe that's the answer. The last job on Earth will be the problem solvers, because that is the key in many ways.
Anne-Marie, do you agree?
It's a really big question. I think it'll be something that will still require a level of empathy and communication. So if you think about, for example, the medical profession, I think that a lot of that will be replaced by artificial intelligence, no question, right? In terms of like the symptoms and how you diagnose, etc. But the actual delivery of bad messages, you know, or news of something that somebody has, needs a human, it needs empathy.
So managing someone's illness.
Managing somebody's illness. Not necessarily coming up with the programme to manage it, but the actual management of it, I think. But I did ask my kids this question, who are 15 and 12, when we were on holiday over Christmas, and they said it would be being a mum, because a robot can't have kids. So there you go.
Good answer.
Maybe a robot can have kids. Who knows?
So a problem-solving, empathetic mother is kind of that's the aim.
The nirvana.
Aim for all.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Finally, I do have a little quiz, if you don't mind. So, Anne-Marie, all of the following jobs did exist at one point in time. 2 of them are now obsolete, but 1 still exists. Which one do you
actually
think?
A proper quiz.
An actual quiz.
Yeah.
Okay, go for it.
So which one do you think still exists? So 1, a human alarm clock. 2, a telephone operator. And 3, a bowling pin setter.
I am a human alarm clock. So that still exists.
But do you get paid for it? That's the
No,
question.
not at all.
No.
Not ever. I think probably a telephone operator.
Telephone operator does still exist.
That's
yeah.
bizarre, isn't it?
Apparently, in the US, if you call 0, you can still get a telephone operator.
Wow.
Yeah, probably not for long. Okay, Matt, final question.
Okay.
One of the following jobs is made up, but may exist in the future. The other 3 do exist today.
Right.
Which one is made up? Okay, 1, professional cuddler. 2, pet stylist. 3, digital locksmith. 4, cat surfing instructor.
It's got to be the cat surfing instructor, hasn't it?
It is. There is, there is in fact a dog surfing instructor,
Really?
but it's not yet spread to cats.
I've got a
yeah.
cat, and I'm pretty confident you're going to have to go a long way to go. So
That's hilarious.
There's a clear gap in the market there. I think
Yeah,
lots are covered.
there you go.
Pet styling is a huge industry.
If we get automated out of work, you know where to go.
Anne-Marie, Matt, thank you so much for coming down and to speak to us today. It's been a great discussion. And everyone listening, thank you so much for downloading this podcast, and thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. Next time, tune in as we dive into our next question: what can we learn from the criminal underground? This podcast is produced by our very own Pod Squad and hosted by George Parrett, Lizzie Elston and Ethan Worth. Thanks to our creative studio for their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett from our consulting team.